Welcome back to Betting Pros' college football preseason win total preview. I am your host, Thor Nystrom, joined as always by the godfather of recruiting, Mike Farrell of Mike Farrell Sports. Mike, how you doing today? And are you ready to rock and talk about some Big 12 and some SEC win totals?
Yeah, I'm ready. I mean, we got. I'm excited because the first one has to be perfect, to go over, and might as well start with the reigning national champions with Georgia. And I know your thoughts a little bit, but go through your Georgia spiel, and I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah, we might as well. Obviously, Georgia at the top of the pecking order. Once again, the odds-on favorite to win a third consecutive national title. And Georgia, you listen to some talk coming out of their camp. They think they might break their own record for NFL draft picks with this team here, even after what we've seen them give to the NFL these past couple years. So, of course, they're on the top of my power rankings. As you alluded to, their over-under is 11.5. So you have zero margin for error. One loss, they go under. My adjusted win total, though, on Georgia is 11.7, which interestingly is the exact same adjusted win total that I had last year on Georgia. Obviously, they ended up winning the title again. I have to pass on this one, though, because we're so close to the margins. And again, not having any margin for error there. But what do you think on the 11.5 number, Mike?
So I'm curious, you got a 0.29 below 12, and I'm looking at the schedule and I'm trying to figure out which team that is. It's certainly not, it's got to be Tennessee. They South Carolina, they're at home.
It's an easy schedule.
Yeah, it's very easy. At Auburn, Kentucky, they should handle. Florida, they should handle. Missouri, they should handle. Ole Miss, tricky, but at home. At Tennessee is the one that sticks out to me. So if you look up and down the schedule, you think, can they win at Tennessee? And they can. So I'm over. I think they're going to go undefeated, and which is stupid. I mean, you shouldn't take that bet. I'm like you. I'm a pass. But if I have to choose, I'm taking the over. Anything could happen. Anything could happen.
Same. Yeah. If I had to lean, I would go over too. You're talking the most talented roster in the NCAA that is playing Phil Steele's number 56 schedule strength. It just is what it is. Like Georgia gave itself another kind of waltzy schedule here. So
but perfection is scary. It's so hard to do. You could have an injury to Brock Bowers in week 2. You don't know. You could have a quarterback play not living up to par. You could have a key injury on the defensive front. You just have no idea. So perfection, I still say over because I don't see a loss here. But if I'm betting this and I'm forced to bet it, the safe route is under. Just assume they stumble through one game, still make the SEC title game, and go on to win the national championship. But you just assume somewhere along the line here there's a stumble. The problem is they're going to be favored probably double digits in every game. Maybe at Tennessee is 7 or 8, but they're just going to be favored. So I'm saying over, but I'm not betting it ever. I'm not betting on perfection. It's just too perfect.
Yeah, Carson Beck takes over for Stetson Bennett. We'll have to see there. That's really the only question that you could have. They're just stacked across the roster. Outside of that, it was interesting that Kirby Smart in the past, he has gone to the portal to sign quarterbacks before. We all remember JT Daniels, et cetera, but he decided not to go after a veteran quarterback this year in the portal, even though there was a whole bunch that, looking from the outside in, you would have thought would have potentially beaten out Carson Beck, although we haven't seen a ton of them yet. And if Beck isn't the guy, if it turns out that he's not the guy, you only have one bullet left with that Brooke. How do you pronounce the last name? Vandergraff?
Vandergriff.
Yeah, couple touted guys that we just haven't seen a lot of yet. But yeah, for me, it's a pass. Mike, sounds like you're pretty close to a pass on that one.
I'm a pass.
I think we can.
I always pick, but I'm a pass.
Yeah. I think we can get better value on the board. And speaking of that, let's talk about the next two as a group. Georgia's biggest competition in the SEC. LSU and Alabama are very interesting to me. And I don't know how you can like both of them this year. I have my preference amongst the two. I'll be curious to see what you say, Mike. But the sports books, and some of this is just name recognition, but the sports books installed, Alabama is still 10.5, their number across the entire board. Every single sports books you look at. LSU, you can still get at 9.5 at, basically anywhere you shop at. those two teams, where would you be looking to bet on those two, Mike?
Well, the 9.5 for LSU, I'd take the over. And now, listen, everybody talks last season about how amazing LSU was under Brian Kelly the first year. They had ups and downs. Um, I know the season ended pretty well for them by all respects, but it's not like they went 11-1. But when I look at this schedule, you give me 9.5, I'm taking the over. You give me 10, I'm probably passing. You give me 10.5, I'm taking the under. But Florida State's a challenge, obviously. The SEC West is a challenge. Alabama is at Alabama. So if I'm saying, there's a potential loss at Alabama, and then I'm saying, Florida State might be a potential loss, I'm still at 10 wins. So I'm taking the over there. Alabama, I'm taking the under because of the quarterback situation. Now, of course, they've had quarterback situations, Blake Barrett and Jalen Hurts, both starting that season, and things turn out well for Alabama, but 10.5 to me is just a little too high. Texas is on that schedule. The SEC West is always a challenge. There could be a stumbling block in there. It could be something silly. It could be a Texas A&M. It could certainly be LSU, even though it's at home. So I'm taking the under for Alabama, and I'm taking the over for LSU.
As am I. Yeah, I really like this LSU team. Last year they did have some ups and downs, like you said. Specifically, the beginning of the season was the big down, right? I mean, everybody remembers that Monday night game against Florida State, and Keishawn Butte was pouting, and you had the close loss at the end. And for a week, everyone was talking about, is Brian Kelly the right fit here? And then what did they win? 10 straight, or I'm sorry, they went 9-1 over their next 10 games after that. This is the season where they're going to be really good because they returned just about everybody. The two guys they lost on offense, it was Jenkins and Butte at receiver, but they were both mediocre last year. You bring back the best one in your receiving core and Neighbors. They also signed a bunch of portal guys. And like I said, basically everybody else on offense is back. And then on defense, they lost a couple of worker bee starters, but like the studs are back, led by Harold Perkins, who was a nightmare to quarterbacks around the nation. So for me, LSU they'd be the dark horse. They're a dark horse to get into the college football playoff and contend for the national title. For me, I think we're going to get a rematch in the SEC title game. And hopefully this time, Jaden Daniels is not gimping around. But because I think this LSU team is in a much better place to potentially give Georgia a run for their money in that type of a venue. And then as far as Alabama, Mike, I agree with you. They only returned 9 starters this year, 4 on offense, 5 on defense. You have quarterback questions. I don't know that I like any of their quarterbacks. I'm not a Tyler Buckner guy. We've been hearing camp reports that Simpson has been struggling. And Milroe has all kinds of issues throwing the ball. He's a great athlete, but I just cannot trust him putting the ball in the air. And I don't think Alabama is going to over a full season either. Then their skill talent is not great. It's way down from, where you think about your older brothers, Alabama Crimson Tide. McClellan looks like he's going to take over a running back, probably more of a platoon this year, though, than it was last year with Gibbs. The receiving corps stunk last year. They really didn't bring any fortification for that at all. The offensive line was patchwork last year as well. That thing was way down. Can that jump back up? I'm not sure about that. And then the defense, you got to be a little bit more bullish on that. Kool-Aid McKinstry coming back, and they have a couple other standout stud type guys. But you have to keep in mind, that defense lost Will Anderson, Brian Branch, Byron Young, Henry Toto, Jordan Battle, DeMarco Helms. All those guys got drafted. It would be a real surprise if Alabama's defense was even as good as they were last year. So I see regression coming on both sides of the ball. I haven't even mentioned that they have this revolving door of assistant coaches where, and like back in the day, previously, it seemed like Saban could sustain that a little bit better. But now every single year you have the different coordinators, you have different assistant coaches, whatnot. And now you're coaching this roster with only 9 returning starters and quarterback questions. My system's total on Alabama is 9.7 against that 10.5 number. I'm even less bullish than my system is. I think Alabama goes 9-3 this year, and it wouldn't surprise me if they go 8-4. I'm definitely going under that 10.5 number. I think that is all name brand value type stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. 8-4 though, I could just
It's a
never see
tough
that
schedule,
happening
Mike.
ever. If they
Very
go
tough
8-4,
schedule.
that's man. I mean, 8-4, then we're talking about should Saban retire talk, and 9-3. I see 10-2.
And that would still be
But it's
under.
still under.
Yeah.
So we agree.
Yeah.
We agree on the under.
Moving to another name brand team where I think the number that was put out for them, it's sort of the opposite, where they still have the stink from last year. So the market still doesn't really trust them. There was a lot of circumstances around why this team had that 1 year blip. The Texas A&M Aggies still around the market. You can get them for 7.5. That's their win total. Mike, what do you think about the Aggies? They're going to bounce back this year with Bobby Petrino?
Man, so this is really going to this is determined, probably 5-6 games in. They're going to beat New Mexico, at Miami. I don't think is as formidable as anybody thinks. Miami's not ready. UL Monroe, Auburn. Then when you go into the 2-game stretch, well, the 3-game stretch really of Arkansas, Alabama, and Tennessee. I'm big on Arkansas. I think the people are picking them to be second worst team in the SEC West. I think they're going to be a tough out. That's at home for them, which is good. Alabama, of course, that's difficult. And then at Tennessee, if they lose those 3 games or 2 of those 3 games, this team could quit. They kind of quit on Jimbo last year. There's a lot of guys, there's a lot of infighting on this roster last year. I'm not sure if he's fixed that. I think he and Petrino are going to butt heads offensively. I like Connor Wegman. I like the receiving core. I think they've got a lot of talent on this roster, a lot of 4- and 5-star kids. I just don't know if they could put it together. So 7.5 is a tempting number, though. But to reach that number, they have to somehow, get through those first 4 games undefeated, then beat Arkansas, maybe split Alabama, Tennessee, and finish the season strong. I'm leaning under. I'm leaning 7-5. I don't believe that this team is a team, and I don't believe that they believe in their head coach.
Shots fired on Jimbo. I'm a little bit more bullish on A&M. This sort of not the same personnel or same conference. It is the same state though. Reminds me a little bit of last year with TCU, where TCU coming off the previous season, the previous season before last year, TCU was able to run the ball, but they had all kinds of problems throwing it. And their defense had this bizarre, precipitous drop where they gave up more than 10 points, more than they had the previous season. And all off season, basically everything TCU did was to address their 2 major weaknesses of offensive passing game and then overall defense. Obviously, Sonny Dykes was to address the passing stuff and whatnot. And then they went out in the portal. They got a bunch of defenders and they retooled the defense, different scheme, different stuff like that. You saw them jump up. With A&M last year, they had an awesome pass defense. Actually, they finished number 1 in the nation in pass defense last year. It's just that their run defense was an abomination, and then they couldn't do anything on offense. Well, similarly to the TCU thing, I think the A&M addressed those things throughout the offseason. One of them just naturally because they had those rash of injuries last year on offense, which was going to make it tough either way. They only had 2 standout skill guys that were vets in Anaya Smith and then Ochain. Both those guys get knocked out. So you were down to basically nothing. And then they had the cluster injuries at quarterback too. They start the true freshman Wegman down the stretch there. And then the play calling was super vanilla as well. Now you're going to get Anaya Smith back. Ochain's gone, but they have plenty of talent at running back. You get Anaya Smith back. The receiving core is stacked with those stud receivers, recruits that you were just mentioning, Mike. Wegman now, he's now a sophomore. He's got that experience. And you address the play calling by going from Jimbo Fisher, who everyone agreed need to put down his little menu cards that he was looking at and calling them plays on, and hand it over to someone else. And we can all agree that Bobby Petrino maybe not the best human being on earth, but he is one of the better play callers in the sport. Every team he goes to, their offense gets way better. And I also think their run defense flipping to the other side is going to get way better because this is the team that you'll recall. And Mike, this is, in your wheelhouse. A couple of years ago, they signed 6 of the 10 top defensive linemen in that high school class. 1 or 2 of those guys is now left. But, I mean, it was because they were sitting behind the guys who got the experience last year when they were only playing freshmen and sophomores. I like this A&M team to bounce back. My projected win total for them is 8.6. So I'm a little over 1 win over what the Vegas total is. I really like A&M. It's one of my favorite overs in the SEC. Moving on to the Kentucky Wildcats, another kind of interesting team here. Post-hypey a little bit, maybe after Will Levis left, after Chris Rodriguez left, etc. They do get back Liam Cohen, who for one season decided to go to the NFL, wanted to be on Sean McVay's staff for a year. That he's like, Sean, maybe a little bit too in, a little bit too out. Now he's back at Liam Cohen. Now he's back at Kentucky. They have a new look backfield. I actually think Kentucky's back. I'm curious your take on this, Mike, but I actually think Kentucky's backfield is going to be better this year between Devin Leary and between Ray Davis, a running back that I like a lot. The over-under for them right now out there across the sports books is 6.5. What do you like over or under on that one, Mike?
I go over. I mean, they've got a tough schedule because they're, obviously in the East, they got Georgia and Tennessee, and then they go cross-conference to Alabama. So there is, you assume 3 losses there. Louisville, it's not an easy game. It's a rivalry game. I'm not saying that's a loss, but that's a potential 4th loss. South Carolina at South Carolina is a potential 4th loss. There's very few games you can pencil in as surefire wins, but this is a good football team. They got an upgraded quarterback. I was never a big Will Levis guy, except for the arm, but he just got worse and worse as the season went on. Devin Leary, if he could stay healthy, is an upgrade there. They've got a really good wide receiver group, like really good that people don't know about. The running game will be, more consistent and not more proficient, but more consistent simply with the suspensions, all the stuff last year. So I think they'll be improved. And Liam Cohen is a good offensive mind. Defensively, they'll be solid as always. The Stoops teams in Kentucky are solid. I'm going over. I'm not saying 9-3, but 8-4 is definitely doable with this schedule. And at the very least 7-5. So, I mean, that's a real low number for me.
I agree. I'm going over on that. My system's win total 7.6 for Kentucky. You mentioned the defense. They finished top 25 in total defense 4 of the last 5 seasons. That thing is just clockwork. They're going to have a good defense again. And I think their offense is going to be way better. You were mentioning some of the context from last year, but that thing, it became sort of rudderless. Whatever excuse you want to toss out for Levis, whether he was banged up, whether the offensive line had regressed last year. Some people were questioning the receiving core during the draft process. Will Levis had a lot of excuses made for him, but however you look at that, the offense was way down last year. The offensive line certainly going to be better. And like I said, I think the backfield is going to be better too. You put that with what should be a top 25 defense again. I like the over. And later on, the schedule does get tougher for Kentucky. But one interesting thing to note here, they're going to be in their first 4 games enormous favorites of more than 2 touchdowns because you open with Ball State, Eastern Kentucky, Akron, Vanderbilt. That's about as easy of an opening as you can get. And then their 5th game is home against Florida. My system's got Kentucky favored by 4.2 points in that game. So a decent shot to start 5-0. That's when it starts to get tough. You got to travel to Georgia. And then you mentioned some of those other games, but I'm thinking that they start out 5-0, and I like their odds of getting to at least 7 wins, but I think Kentucky's getting to 8. I definitely like this roster. Mike, moving to one that I don't like as much because I don't think that the pieces that are on hand fit with the new systems that are being installed. Sometimes you see this with coaching changes. The Mississippi State Bulldogs, obviously the tragedy with Mike Leach. They're now going to Zach Arnett, the former defensive coordinator. He's flipping the offense from the air raid, obviously that was Leach's baby, to more of a ground and pound type offense. With the former guy from Appalachian State, you're going to see some RPOs, you're going to see some play action, and they're going to want to establish the run. You're going to see a heck of a lot more of the quarterback under center, different stuff like that. The win total is from Vegas is a little bit pessimistic, as it probably should be with this precipitous of a system change from one to the other at 6.5. What's your thoughts on Mississippi State against that number, Mike?
Yeah, I'm under two. I mean, Will Rogers brings a lot of experience. Jaquavius Marks brings a lot of experience. They'll be able to run the football. They've lost some key weapons at wide receiver. The schedule itself, I mean, it's not horrible, but there's still LSU, Alabama. Those are two losses for sure. You would assume. At South Carolina, cross conference is not easy. Arkansas is not easy. Texas A&M should be improved. Ole Miss is tough to finish the season. I mean, you mentioned roster, and we're gonna talk about this for a few different schools, but we talk about it with Luke Fickell in Wisconsin, and is the personnel there for his air raid offense? I think it is. Is the personnel there for what they want to do at Mississippi State in such a drastic offensive change? I don't think it is. I don't think you've got a strong run blocking offensive line. I don't think you got a team that's going to be able to wear people down. I think you've got a quarterback that's used to throwing the ball a ton, who's going to have to, sort of pull that back a little bit, who doesn't have a great receiver group. I think they're going to try to run and stay in games, but I think they're going to lose. I look at it 6-6, and I know Mississippi State fans aren't going to be happy with that, but I don't like this number.
Me either. I'm definitely going under. It's sort of you have 8 guys coming back on offense, 8 starters, but it's sort of wasted here with this scheme transition because all those guys, they were recruited for the air raid, and it's just a totally different thing, right? Like Leach, like the athletic, lighter offensive lineman. Where he would do, and then he would do the big splits. He just wanted guys that could pass block, sit back on their rockers, and then just stay with the defensive lineman in space, whatnot, keep them out of the quarterback's kitchen. Those are the guys now that are going to have to be coming forward for shooting off the line and everything. They can say whatever they want in camp, but that's a big difference, especially when you were recruited for a specific type of system. So that's the kind of player you are. And now you're going to Appy State, where all their offensive linemen, is like all the, like Colby Gossett and guys like that. They would eschew athleticism for just sort of the country strong brawler guys, because that's the guys that they had access to, whatnot. But that's what this system calls for. So I don't see the fit there. Marks is an air back, receiving back guy. Now he's going to get a bunch of touches as a runner. How is he going to do running inside, especially if they're not run blocking well for him? I don't know how that's going to go. And then Rogers, it's just a totally different thing. He had done really good, sort of getting down the beats of the air raid and everything like that, all the different cadences with that and whatnot. But you have to go from that to this entirely new scheme. And then on defense, they had a really salty defense last year, as you recall, but they only have 4 guys back on that side of the ball. So it's hard to be optimistic about that as well. My system's win total on Mississippi State is 5.8, so I'm definitely going under the 6.5. Mike, we want to hit a couple other SEC teams really quick before we move on to the Big 12. Let's talk about Tennessee and South Carolina, 2 teams that had a very entertaining game last year. I don't know if all fans would agree with that assessment. But I had a lot of fun watching it. Two very interesting teams, a little bit on different ends here as far as their Vegas win total. Tennessee Vols, even though they lost Hendon Hooker, lost a couple other guys, obviously the 2 receivers, Tillman and Hyatt, going to the NFL, they're still installed as 9.5, their win total in Vegas right now. Whereas South Carolina, more around what we've seen. I think this was their win total last year, 6.5. With those 2, Mike, what do you think about those 2 teams and specifically against their win totals?
So I'm under on Tennessee. I think a 9-3 season would be great. They still haven't fixed their defense. They should be a little bit improved in the secondary, but not a ton. We don't know how good Joe Milton is. He could be great. He's got a great arm, but to match what Hooker did, and they lose their top 2 wide receivers, they lose their best offensive lineman. I just go under, and then. With South Carolina, I'm going over. And not bullish on them as far as a 9-win football team like the South Carolina fans are. They finished the season, with beating Clemson and Tennessee, and now they think they're world beaters, and they're not. And I don't trust Spencer Rattler as far as I can throw him, but he's got a much more talented roster around him. He's got more weapons, and I think they'll be able to go over that number.
Yeah, so I'm going to shade both of them under. So I agree with you on Tennessee. The my total on Tennessee is 8.4. Obviously against the 9.5 number, I would have to go under. And I agree with, sort of what you were saying about that. I've never been a big believer in Joe Milton because when, we've seen him, we got to see him, what was it, 2019 when he started at Michigan, the first couple games before he got benched. And then a couple years ago before he got benched for Hendon Hooker. And then, of course, at the end of last season as well, when Hooker got injured. But he has that bazooka arm, which is why they call him Bazooka Joe. And he has the athleticism. But you just see too many mistakes there, specifically reading the field. And too many times he fires fastballs into the chest plates of linebackers and different stuff like that. Over an entire course of a season, that's the kind of thing that can flip games, especially when your defense can't stop anybody. Tennessee's defense last year was solid against the run, to be fair. But Mike, you brought it up right away when you brought up the Tennessee defense, that their secondary, you said the secondary should be better. I hope so. They better praise though.
It can't be worse.
They got ripped up by everybody last year. That's what's
except for Will
Levis.
Everybody but Will Levis.
Everybody, yeah. Right. Will Levis had a tough campaign, but that's what started the resurgence of Spencer Rattler. He got to face the Tennessee pass defense. It was like all of a sudden the old Spencer Rattler was back. So for that reason, I would shade Tennessee under. As far as South Carolina goes, I love what Beamer's doing. And, the fact that Rattler came back was obviously good for them and different stuff like that. They did have a couple portal losses, which stunk. Jaheim Bell leaving for Florida State. You had Marshawn Lloyd leaving for the other USC. They did a good job of patching the hole at tight end. They signed like 3 different guys that I thought were starting caliber. But the running back room is a concern for me. I was unclear as to why they weren't able to get a better running back in the portal. Assuredly, they tried. Trayshawn Ward was one of them, Mike. They made a run at Trayshawn, but Trayshawn ends up jumping up to Kansas State. Thought that was a better situation for him, apparently. So my number on South Carolina is 5.9. It's not a play for me, just because I do like the South Carolina team a little bit. But at that 6.5 number, if I had to say one, I would lean it under. Before we get to the Big 12, which we're going to break down here in a second, I want to take a quick break and encourage everyone out there to download the free Betting Pros app. One really cool feature about it is you can follow experts like myself, like Mr. Mike Farrell, to get instant notifications of our bets. I was putting some of those bets in, Mike, and they show up on the phone right away. So like right when I put it in, it'll go out when Mike, when you put yours out, I'm following you. I get the notifications with that as well. And it's not just the experts at Fantasy Pros and Betting Pros that you get that access to. You can follow anybody on there. You can sort it by top rated bettors, like people out there that are putting in their picks, bettors who are on hot streaks, and you can get instant notifications of their bets. And there's a lot of sharks swimming in those waters. Trust me. If you want to take a look at my URL for anybody out there, it's bettingpros.com/Thor. Those notifications, like I said, you can customize those notifications so you only receive the betting alerts that you want. You can also make them by better, by sport, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. To take advantage of these features and more, download the Betting Pros app by visiting bettingpros.com/apps or search Betting Pros in the App Store. It's a very good app. Very good app. Yeah, thumbs up from both Mike and I. We are users, and we would be users even if we weren't drawing a paycheck from those guys. It's good stuff. Let's move to the Big 12, Mike. Let's start at the top with the big boy, the Texas Longhorns. Basically, my question for you, Mike, is, and we have a total on the Longhorns at 9.5. Is any team in the Big 12 even close to Texas? Right now, if you look at the sports books, Texas to win the Big 12, it's literally even money, like at most of the books. So that it's them against the field. Do you are you going to take Texas over the field to win the conference? And then my second question would be against that 9.5 number.
Oh, man, it's tough. I mean, they got all the talent in the world. They're the most talented roster in the Big 12, but they're Texas, and they always seem to disappoint. They've had one 10-win season since what 2009 when Mac Brown brought them the national title, and that was the Tom Herman year, and he was fired a couple years later. They just don't win 10 games. But this year they should. So I'm on the over at Alabama. Maybe a loss. They played them close last year before Quinn Ewers got hurt. But even if you chalk that one up to a loss, the conference is deep, but it's not. There's a lot missing. I mean, TCU lost a ton. Kansas State lost a lot of players that made an impact on their Big 12 championship last year. You got BYU and Houston on the schedule coming in. Iowa State stinks. Texas Tech's going to be better. Oklahoma, they drilled 50 billion to nothing last year. I just can't find the 3 losses required to go under. So
I can't either. Yeah. And you get nervous, right? Like going over on Texas with a number like this for all the context that Mike just said. And every single year it's like Texas is back. But when this year specifically in the Big 12, you look at any power ranking out there, as far as mine goes, Texas is 4th. And then the next highest team is Oklahoma. I think I have them 19th. You have this huge discrepancy between Texas and then the rest of the league. And I agree with you, Mike. Like most of the rest of the Big 12 is wide open. Like the other team that faces Texas in the Big 12 title game, I feel pretty confident saying Texas is going to be there unless Ewers gets hurt. And even if Ewers gets hurt, now they have pretty good quarterback depth there too. They're protected.
Malik Murphy is excellent.
Yeah, and you got Arch there as well. Like
that's true, Arch Manning. Malik Murphy is excellent.
I know you're not a fan, Mike.
Arch Manning is not ready. He's not ready this year. If they go from Quinn Ewers to Arch Manning, then take the under. Not ready. Malik Murphy is good.
There a lot of positives coming out about Malik Murphy. I mean, this could be Malik Murphy's last year, and Austin might transfer out after this year. But I mean, yeah, if
he could be a Matt Castle, he could be like never play and be drafted.
Yeah. Well, I do think he's going to go and find himself a starting job here somewhere, after this coming season. But if he is called into duty, I agree with you. I think they're in capable hands. But yeah, like as far as the team that theoretically, hypothetically, they would play in the Big 12 title game, that thing is wide open behind them because you have a bunch of these teams like clustered there. But as far as Texas goes, the clear class of the Big 12, across the roster, you look at it and you're ranking like the positions in the Big 12. Texas is 1 or 2 in every single one. So I got to go over on that Texas one. My total on Texas is 10.6. So it's another one where I'm over a win above what the Vegas total is. So now, Mike, we're going to move down into sort of that second, maybe this would be more like third tier. But this is one of the ones that I like that's kind of off the beaten trail. So I thought we would talk about these guys because they're not getting a lot of hype this preseason. But I think things might set up well for them to have a little bit of a bounce back year. The Oklahoma State Cowboys, they returned 13 starters. They only have the Vegas win total of 6.5, which obviously Gundy has made a habit of getting over that. But he had the tough year last year. Then Spencer Sanders transfers out, goes to Ole Miss. Seems like Spencer Sanders is going to be a backup this year, but we digress. But I do think Oklahoma State could cobble something together here, particularly against this super crappy schedule that they're facing. They caught it right with both the out of conference they could affect, and they certainly have a solid out of conference. But in the Big 12 play, Mike, before I kick it to you, they get West Virginia, Kansas, Iowa State, and all 4 newcomers are on Oklahoma State's schedule. Texas, TCU, Baylor are not. I think you know where I'm going, Mike, but what do you think about Oklahoma State against that 6.5 win total?
Yeah, and you got a good coach too. I mean, 6.5 is very low. Oklahoma State traditionally wins over 6.5 every year. Sometimes they'll pull that surprising 10 or 11 win season. Last year they started off great and then just fell apart. Their quarterback room is awful. That's my only concern. But you're putting it at 6.5. I'm taking the over with a really good coach who knows what he's doing. Like you said, cobble together. If I'm betting, I'm betting on to cobble together 7 wins with just a horrible quarterback situation. What the hell was he doing in the portal? I mean, the portal is loaded with quarterbacks who have a pulse, and he gets Alan Bowman, who's on his 5th leg injury, and then he's got his son in there, and Garrett Rangel, and I mean, just I can't even describe how bad this quarterback room is, and that could really screw them. But I'm saying this coach, he's a good coach. He's going to cobble together 7 wins with that schedule. The schedule's so easy.
As someone who could never quit Alan Bowman, that hurts me to hear, Mike. And
I mean, he was good 100 years
yeah.
ago on one leg.
Yeah,
He's not
we
now.
haven't seen him for a whole long time. For people out there that are like, wait, the Alan Bowman from Cliff Kingsbury's Texas Tech Red Raiders?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that exact one.
Cliff Kingsbury has gone on the NFL, been fired. This is the last time Alan Bowman played a good football game.
Yeah, we haven't seen him in a while. Last couple of years, he's been on the Michigan bench, but we'll have to see. At least he's familiar with an offensive system like this. And Oklahoma State's defense has to get better. Like they were one, as I was talking about TCU a little bit ago, where the defense from year to year, Patterson's last year just fell off a cliff. That's what happened to Oklahoma State last year. They got a new defensive coordinator in. They're going to a 3-3-5. Their defense is going to be better. I'm going over that number. Mike, now a couple of teams, we can hit these ones in conjunction. A couple of teams that I don't like as much. BYU, one of the newcomers, and then West Virginia. BYU, obviously, coming in, they're a new look team. It's not just the conference affiliation different now, but outside of Sataki, everything sort of changed. He got rid of the whole defensive staff. He got rid of the strength coach. A couple of his offensive studs went to the NFL, but then there was a rash of portal guys leaving. So then Sataki hit the portal hard to try to bring guys back to BYU. Seems like they lost more talent maybe than they brought back in. They're going with Keaton Slovis in the backfield. I don't know about old Keaton Slovis. Like as a freshman at USC way back in the day when he was playing for Clay Helton, showed some promise, but the luster has faded from Mr. Keaton Slovis. I like the running back a little bit, Aiden Baskin-Robbins. He's a tackle breaker, but he's not explosive. You're going to get some efficiency there. But Mike, BYU, and then hit on West Virginia as well. Let's talk about these two teams. We have totals. The reason I grouped them, Vegas has totals of 5.5 on both of them.
Yeah, I got the under on both. BYU, I think, normally brings a different brand of football to the Big 12. It's, they do well with offensive linemen. They can play physical. They can pound the ball, but I really worry about them holding up defensively against the speed of the Big 12, and I think they're going to get lit up quite a bit. And then West Virginia, he's probably going to be fired by 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth game of the season. I mean, they're going to lose at Penn State.
Neil Brown, you're talking about.
Yeah, Neil Brown. Yeah. They'll lose to Pitt. They'll lose to Texas Tech. They'll lose at TCU. He'll be fired. And the new coach will come in and try to put together, 4 more wins to get you an over. It's not going to happen. So go with the under on both of those.
I totally agree. Yeah, BYU just lost too much. And Mike, I totally agree with you. Like that's the defense there is just super bad. Last year, 93rd in yards per game allowed. And I know what they're trying to do. They hired the ex Weber State head coach to try to turn around the defense. I think it's going to take longer than a year, though, especially with all the different guys that they ended up losing. My adjusted win total on BYU is 5. So I'm going to shade that under the 5.5. And then as far as West Virginia goes, I couldn't agree with your take more. Neil Brown, the only reason that he's even still the coach there is because they made the ill-fated contract extension to him a couple of years ago, where this is one of the things I hate most about college football. It's like one of my random pet peeves where you give the coach the extension when nobody's coming after him. You're bidding against yourself, and then you're putting your
for recruiting. It's for living rooms, and it's dumb.
It's dumb. Yeah, I mean, like in that situation, it's like, what was West Virginia seeing where then you tie yourself up and then you see the manifestation of it. I think in any other, if that contract extension was not in place, I think Neil Brown would have been fired last year. I don't think that's a take that's out there, whatever. But I agree. Like this year, if things start out poorly and it looks from the schedule, certainly like it could, the fans there are going to be calling for that guy's head. And this will start in September if it starts out bad enough. So I think that whole thing could go down. The new quarterback, Garrett Green, we haven't seen a ton of him, but he wasn't even as good as JT Daniels on the per snap basis last year when he did play, because we saw him just a little bit. The one thing, they got 2 things going for him on offense. You have CJ Donaldson and you have a good offensive line. But so you have that, but like I just don't think the passing game is going to be there. And then the defense, they lost some of their best defenders to the NFL. So I just, yeah, with that thing, I'm out on that. The defense last year was 115th in points per game allowed, so not good for West Virginia. We'll have to see how Neil Brown does there. And Mike, a couple quick hitters before we let the folks get out the door here. I want to talk quick about Kansas State, and then I want to talk as well about one of the other newcomers in UCF. Let's start with Kansas State. They have a Vegas total of 8.5 out there. Some books 8. You might maybe even a 7.5 out there if you look hard enough. But they're an interesting team, right? They're turning it over to Will Howard. Obviously, they lost their Darren Sproles-like star running back in Deuce Vaughn, who is now warming the hearts of Dallas Cowboy fans everywhere. So you have to sort of reconstitute what that offense has looked like here the past 3-4 years. What do you think about Kansas State? And when you're thinking about them against a total of 8.5, would you go over or under that?
If you can get 7.5, go over. 8.5, probably under. I like Chris Kleiman. I like this team. I think they're not going to lose a whole lot. And they did win the Big 12 last year. I just think, Deuce Vaughn with so much of that offense, he's going to be hard to replace. The schedule itself isn't horrible. They get Texas, but they don't get Oklahoma. They've got some easy layup wins, but I just can't get to 9. And 9's a lot. 9-3 is tough. So I'm going to take the under. But if you can find it at 7.5, I think it's a really good over at 8-4 because that's what they're going to go.
Yeah, so I'm looking on one of those things where they aggregate a bunch of them. Looks like it is more 7.5 across the market. To your point, yeah. So with that one, with the 7.5, that's very close to what my adjusted win total is for Kansas State. I'm at 7.2. So for me, at that number, that would be a stay away. It looks like the market has been banging that thing down from where the opener was. But yeah, like they do have talent. I thought Will Howard was better than Adrian Martinez when they were playing last year because he gives you that element of stretching the defense downfield. Obviously is a better passer than Martinez, and he can fling it a little bit. You don't get quite the mobility. I do like Trayshawn Ward as well. I mean, he got run out of Florida State through no fault of his own. It's just that Trey Benson is a demigod running back. Like Trey Benson is going to rip it up this year. So I understand why Trayshawn had to get out of there. This should be a good spot for him. And he's platooning with that Giddens kid, who was also pretty solid last year when he got on the field. But yeah, and they do have a solid offensive line, but you lose Felix, Felix Adunze. I'm not even going to try.
Felix A. Let's just call him Felix A.
They lose Felix. You lose Brent as well. So the defense could be in for a little bit of a regression. That one's a stay away for me. Mike, let's just quickly talk about UCF. They have a win total of 6.5, which I thought was interesting in their first year in the Big 12. They're my highest power rated newcomer into the Big 12. Do you think they make a bowl in their first season? What do you think about that 6.5 number?
Yeah, there's a lot of talent on this football team. Gus has done a good job in the portal. I think they're going to hit the ground running. I think they could win 8 games. So 6.5 is very low to me. Again, they've got some tough games. At Boise State is not an easy out-of-conference game. They're on the road against Kansas State. But for the most part, they've got a lot of good games at home. They finish, with Houston. I think they should beat Houston. They'll beat Oklahoma State. I think they'll beat West Virginia. So I think they can finish strong, get above that 6.5 number.
Yeah, my just win total on UCF is 7.1. So I would lean over as well. Their roster, it's a little bit, like we were talking about BYU, where it's just like a hope and a prayer at several different positions and whatnot. And then, you look at another newcomer, like, for instance, Houston, where they're really good at a couple of positions, but then some other positions just absolutely are not Power 5 caliber right now, like, across the roster, whatnot. So I'm a little bit more pessimistic on those. But with UCF, you have a roster that's basically all Power 5. They were either guys that came down from the Power 5 as transfers, or they're guys that chose UCF over the Power 5. And then they're being coached by a guy who was very successful at the Power 5 level before he came to UCF in Gus. I think that system will work out as well. And it'll be interesting because more of these Big 12 teams go into the 3-3-5 and whatnot. and Gus wants to run the ball a little bit more. Of course, they do have that spread offense, whatnot, but you have some thinner boxes there in the Big 12, and with the system that Gus runs and Rice Plumlee getting out of the pocket and everything like that, I think UCF could have success immediately running the ball in the Big 12. You just don't have a lot of good run defenses in the Big 12. So I think what they do will at least translate good enough in this. We talked about it behind Texas. You have just a bunch of teams there kind of in a quagmire. I think UCF will acquit itself okay as far as that goes. So I'm going to go over that 6.5 number and say they go 7-5. Guys, that's all the time that we have for today. For Mike Farrell, I'm Thor Nystrom. Join us next time as we talk ACC and Pac-12 win totals.